So here we are at Whitlingham Park on the outskirts of Norwich. You can just hear the hum of the southern bypass, the sound of the now. Yet, beneath my feet, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fragments of Nat Flint. Some of them at least 12,000 years old. But it's not my ears that can hear the sound of the napping, of the digging of the holes. It's something else. A feeling that this land is ancient. This land is full of humanity. I can see it in the shape of the hills, the leaning of the trees, and something else. Something that has no words. What's the connection between a storyteller and nature? Do they act like a bridge between you and the wild? And how do they do that? So a storyteller, when they start out in this oral tradition, they begin to remember stories, they learn stories, they share stories. And slowly, over time, they realize something, that they become part of it. Not the words, but the very thing that they're describing. They become the protagonists. And that can be a hill. They can become part of the hill, like it's behind me. They can understand that there are flints underneath. They can feel it. They begin to understand what it feels like to be a huge oak tree, a tall ash tree, a great willow tree draping its branches in the water. And they become the animals, the creatures. They sense the day and the night, the cold and the heat. It just becomes part, as if the very stories for thousands of years have held the essence of landscape and nature itself. Storytellers will do this in many ways. For me, I needed to go on workshops when I began to understand that there was something more to a story than just trying to remember it. There was something more than just being in a certain point of history. There was something else. And I didn't know what it was, wasn't sure. So I went on a totemic course at the end of the 90s. And in it, we sat in a circle, a group of storytellers, and we were asked by the course leaders to consider any stories that we knew, that we told, that we enjoyed, that had animals in them. Of course, we all considered that, and then we wrote down a list of our favourite stories and what animals were there. Some of us, I was not one of them, but some of us saw a pattern. I didn't. The next day we were told to just go and wander. Notice nature. Be inside a story, or just be walking between the trees. So I went out. Went down a path. And there, coming down the path towards me, he just bobbed out from beneath the hedge. There was a leveret, a little hare, and it came bobbing down towards me, hopping and hopping until it came right to my shoes. It sniffed at the shoes. And then it went away, back up the path. The next day I went down that path again, curious as if I would see the leveret, and there he was, coming towards me. Came right down to my shoes, but this time he looked up at me, stared at me, and something happened. I could never tell you what happened. It was just as if something opened. And then he hopped away. The third morning, all of us storytellers, having done our work, We were instructed that we were going to spend about 3 hours walking a Bronze Age footpath that had been walked and walked like this land for thousands of years, and that we, as storytellers, were to say nothing. Very difficult for storytellers. So we set out. We were to consider what conclusions we had come about our totemic animals, what connections we had with nature. 3 hours of silence. We passed a great stone circle called the Crown in silence. And eventually, at the end of our journey, we came to a tombstone, raised land, ancient trees. And the course leaders said, take a moment, breathe in, consider, and then go where you want to go and think about your possible totemic animal. I looked around. There were these 2 standing stones with another stone across the top, bridging them. Several people went down into that tomb, but I didn't want to go there. I looked around and then I saw over there, about 100 yards away, there was this hawthorn tree. And beneath the hawthorn tree there was this cut grass, smooth, rounded. And there was a illumination, I can call it, an emanation. I needed to go there. I was animated to go there. So I went and sat on that grass beneath the hawthorn tree. I shut my eyes. And the first thing I saw was that leveret coming hopping towards me. And then, in my mind's eye, there were hundreds of them all around me, gathered around, looking up at me. And then I knew what my animal was. My connection with nature was through the hair, the magical hair that makes a division between life and death, between the 2 worlds. And then I felt a gentle pressure on this shoulder. I opened my eyes and looked around, and there was the course leader, Hugh Lupton. He said, so Paul, why are you sitting here? Nobody else is sitting here. What are you doing here? So I told him my story. And he went very quiet. And he looked down at the ground and he said, I'll tell you something very important. That right beneath your feet, there is buried a Celtic chief. And always with a Celtic chief, there will be buried a hare. Yeah. And from that time on, the door of nature, the wild, was open. And I began to realize that it is the land that shapes us, not the other way around. I began to realize that a storyteller has an opportunity to share that open door, to make the bridge for those who listen to the world, this wild world that we have drifted so far away from.